My name is Sarah Intelligator. I'm a family law attorney in Los Angeles. So that encompasses divorce, child custody, domestic violence, unfortunately.
Dang.
Yeah. Serious stuff. Yeah.
How many years?
I've been practicing for close to 20 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And now I'm an author too, because I guess I just wrote a book. So not just, it came out almost a year ago now, but yeah.
What inspired you to write that book?
There were two reasons. One was that I see children going through the divorce process and or the custody process, and to me that's the product of a relationship that maybe shouldn't have existed in the first place or that wasn't right. And that doesn't mean that all kids who go through divorce or custody battles suffer, but I see a lot of children suffering. And if I could I guess I should back up because the book is about relationships and finding the right relationship, and it's sort of reverse engineered from the perspective of a divorce attorney. So to me, I was thinking that if I could help people find the right kind of relationship and stay in that relationship, then I could hopefully prevent children from having to go through this really painful experience. Not always painful, but typically very earth-shattering for children to go through it, even in the most peaceful and amicable situations. So that was one impetus for it. And the second impetus for it was that I had gone through my own divorce when I was very young. And I didn't want people to experience the pain of that. Even though mine was very amicable, very easy, it's still accompanied by a lot of pain, a lot of stress. And I don't think it's necessary. I think so many people enter into relationships for the wrong reasons. And my goal is to identify these reasons for people so that they can look for the right reasons and get into relationships for the right reasons and the right relationship consequently.
Can you name some of those red flags?
Yes. So in my book, which is called Live, Laugh, Find True Love, I break it down into 6 categories that I call the 6 F words. And those are fear, fundamental values, family, fixing, foundation, and fairy tale. And so I kind of talk about these 6 categories in my book a lot more. But for example, fundamental values. To me, that is, these 6 words are in no particular order, but fundamental values to me is number 1. Like that is, if you do not share fundamental values with your partner or the person with whom you're in a relationship, the relationship doesn't have staying power. You're not going to seek to navigate life in the same sort of way. And so there's going to be dissonance in your relationship, particularly if you end up having children, then you might seek to raise those children in a different way. And you don't have the glue that you need to hold the relationship together. So for me, not sharing fundamental values is a huge red flag for a relationship. For example, foundation. I break foundation down into something called the 5 pillars because I liken it to the foundation of a house, right? If your house doesn't have a solid foundation, the structure will crumble. And the same thing is true of a relationship. If the relationship doesn't have a solid foundation, the relationship is going to crumble. And so those 5 pillars that hold the relationship up are trust, honesty, communication, teamwork, and respect. And those things need to be present in the relationship. And if they aren't, then that's a huge red flag, right? So I think that a lot of people see the red flags in relationships. And I talk about this a lot in the book, how people just kind of sweep them under the rug and hope that they'll just go away because they so badly want to be in a relationship. They're so afraid to be alone. They're scared they're not going to find somebody else. They're not going to find somebody better. There's so many things that go on in our minds. And so we see these red flags, and most people know they see the red flags in relationships. And at the same time, they just dismiss them because they think, oh, I can get past this, or that's not a big deal. They justify things to themselves in the hope that they will get to stay in the relationship and then not be alone and not have to face those things that they're afraid of. But those things do come back to haunt you because the thing about sweeping red flags under the rug is the pile just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually you trip over it, right? And it's not going anywhere. It stays there. So, I think that and I can go into more of the F words in more detail if you'd like, but I just, these are, to me, the red flags I've identified in the relationships, the people who come into my office who are going through a divorce or separating from their partners. And these are kind of the things, the patterns that I see over and over and over again about relationships that do not work out, that fail ultimately.
I always see this on Instagram that it's mostly on the woman's side to break a marriage. Is that true or no?
I don't think that's true. I mean, I represent men and women equally, and I see many men who are initiating a divorce just as I see women who are initiating it. So I don't think that's true.
So both sides?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Like pretty evened out?
I think I would say it's pretty even. I think from what I see, women initiate domestic violence more, and there might be several reasons for that. But in terms of initiating a breakup or the end of a relationship or a marriage, it's pretty equal, I would say, from my experience.
What are some other patterns?
So, okay, so we talked about fundamental values. We talked about foundation. And so fear, which we kind of touched upon, it's another one. I think that people stay in these relationships because they're afraid to leave them. Sometimes, it's a biological clock issue. Like, I am getting older. My time is running out to have a child. I need to have a child. So whoever I'm dating at the moment will do. And so they just end up procreating with whoever they're dating, or there's so many fears in our minds. I talk about in the book, even domestic violence situations are a fear situation. Like, the abuser is, the victim of domestic violence is often afraid to leave the relationship because they're being pressured. They're being told that they're not good enough, that they're not ever going to meet anybody else again, right? It's a lot of psychological abuse, but also a lot of times there's financial pressure. Like, the abusive partner may be in control of all the assets. And so the victim may not feel like he or she can leave the relationship, or, what is going to happen to me? How am I going to support my children? Things like that. So there are actual genuine fears, real fears. And that's not to say that those other fears aren't genuine or real, but they're things that we kind of concoct in our minds versus, actual, like, real tangible fears, like a domestic violence situation. And in the book, I talk a little bit about how we can transcend those fears, because I think it's good and fine to say, oh, yes, I'm afraid to be alone. I'm choosing this relationship because I'm afraid I'm never going to find anyone else better. But how do we get over that? How do we transcend that and overcome it? And it's not an easy thing to do because we trust our fear, right? Our fear, in my mind, fear is the thing that has kept us safe throughout our lives. Excuse me. We don't touch a hot stove because we are afraid that we're going to burn ourselves. And so fear has kind of protected us throughout our lives. It's kept us safe. So we trust it. But fear is very short term. It's like a short term protector. It protects us from burning ourselves in that instant moment. If you're not going to jump into shark-infested waters because you're afraid you're going to get bitten by a shark, right? That's in the moment. Your fear protects you. But our intelligence and our intuition, I think, have the power to combat fear. They are things that we know. I kind of liken them to Jiminy Cricket in my book, because it's like we all have this conscience and this voice inside that's telling us what we really genuinely deep down inside know. And then the fear is talking to us and saying, no, forget that guy. That guy's not going to protect you. But our intuition and our intelligence are actually going to protect us long term versus our fear that's only protecting us in the short term. So if you're able to kind of not turn off that voice that's telling you, don't touch the hot stove, but to take a step back and to really be able to self-reflect and understand that that voice is just trying to keep you safe in the moment, And when we're looking at relationships, we're not looking at momentary. We're looking at lifelong, hopefully, right? So if you really trust your intuition, I've had so many people tell me, I knew that person wasn't right for me after the fact. But then they didn't listen to their intuition. They didn't trust themselves, right? Because they were afraid. So we have to really take a step back and listen to our intuition.
Are there moments where you would have been like, you guys could have worked that out? Where you're like, I don't know, like a lot of times I feel like it's like almost like my responsibility to, like, I always feel like celebrities, like when both are very independent and they can go no matter what. I have another house. We both have income. It's very easy to walk away from the situation. Different than when you have children together, you build a business together. Sometimes you have to work things out, and that is like, it's a fine line between like, it's good to depend on each other, or it becomes like a very negative kind of thing. But sometimes I feel like it's really good if you need each other, because if you don't need each other at all, if I don't support my wife at all, and she can just be good without me, why bother, getting in conflict? And I mean, there's a lot that comes with a marriage, a lot of negative stuff, right? So I feel like sometimes there needs to be some dependence. It's a healthy dependence is necessary almost to stay together. Otherwise, you're just out.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I've never actually been asked that. I think that there is some validity to that. I think we do want to be independent. We don't want to get swallowed up by the relationship or be codependent, obviously. But marriage is a partnership. In fact, in California, and I'm licensed to practice in California, so I can really talk about only California. But in California, we talk about the family code actually deems married persons in a fiduciary relationship that they compared to business partners, right? So we have this fiduciary obligation to one another in the divorce to make complete disclosures. We stand in this partnership. So even the California legislature has really kind of sort of identified a marriage as this business partnership in a sense, or analogized it to it anyway. And, a marriage, and one of the pillars in foundation that I talk about is teamwork. So even though we're not codependent on one another, I do think that we are in a partnership, and we are sort of dependent in the sense that we have to work together as a team. And when one person succeeds, the other person succeeds. When one person fails, the other person fails, and we need to work together to make the team succeed and the partnership succeed, because we're now a unit, we're now a family. So I think that's a valid point. I think seeing each other as, and this is something I talk about in my book as well, is that I see a lot of people who come into my office and they have separate bank accounts. There's nothing wrong with that. People can have separate bank accounts. They don't have any they never joined any bank accounts ever. They're like, we've kept everything separate, so everything is completely separate. We don't have to worry about dividing it. And I remind them that in California, at least, California is in the minority in the country, but it's a community property state, which means 50% of anything earned during the marriage is half of one partner's, and 50% is the other partner's, no matter who earned it. So I remind them that even though, thinking of things as separate, it's still community property. And, in this thinking of each other and themselves as separate, I don't think that's healthy for the relationship. Even though it's fine to maintain separate bank accounts and do that, I think it speaks to a larger issue, which is that you don't see yourselves as a unit. Like, you're not both contributing to the same bank account to pay for the joint expenses. Like, you're both kind of keeping separate lives in a way, and not recognizing that both of your incomes or both of your contributions are to the team.
And do you feel like there's like a false narrative putting pushed on people that like women need to be independent? Because it's like a slippery slope.
Yeah,
I feel like, because like it sounds like very sexist to need a man, but I think if a woman doesn't need, like, it's just naive to think you don't need your like. Look at the children.
Yeah.
A child needs a dad and a mom. I mean, it works in the best. You can see it on a daily level. Like when I'm angry, she comforts the kids, and when the kids irritate her, I feel this calmness come over me, and I know now I need to comfort them, and I need to. It always works like in a yin and yang, where I feel like it needs both, because the mom is too protective. She might be too looking out, and the dad is way too optimistic, where he's like, oh, too rough, too hard, too strict. So it really balances each other out, and the dependence is so necessary. You need each other so much in a relationship, in a family, and there's this narrative like you don't need a man. Men are toxic. You see it in all the Hollywood movies. You see it on a daily level that like you like when you watch movies and media, it all goes down on like an attack on women and men, because also that the woman needs to be successful, the woman needs to make money, the job at home is not respected anymore. It's not it's looked down upon for a mom to decide, I want to just stay at home and raise the kids, which is kind of like the hardest job in the world, you know?
Yes.
So and same thing with dads get like celebrated when they stay at home, so I feel like that really might contribute to this whole divorce topic. I don't know if you've seen the difference in those 20 years, because I think 20 years ago, people didn't have a problem with like a man being the leader of the family. Do you see that?
I haven't personally seen a tremendous change in terms of people having a problem with a stay-at-home dad versus a stay-at-home mom. I think that even though it's sort of unspoken, I think that there is some sort of, not stigma, because that's the wrong word, maybe in some areas in some parts of the country, but at least in California, I don't think there's necessarily a stigma with a stay-at-home dad, but I think we traditionally see a stay-at-home mom, certainly. But to your point about needing both parents, and both parents kind of offering different things to the child, and that quality of balance. I'm a big proponent of balance. I taught yoga for 20 years, and I really, I think that balance is important across all arenas, because everything in nature seeks equilibrium, right? That's the law of nature, is to seek that balance. And I think that it is important to have both of those parents, because they do offer different things to the child. I'm not sure if I answered your question, because there were several points you made there.
Yeah. With the parents coming in that want divorce, do you see, is it like feminine men coming in, or do you see stoic, masculine men that want a divorce, or do you see a very feminine woman that dresses feminine, acts feminine, that doesn't want a divorce?
I see all kinds, to be quite honest. I wouldn't, and I would happily tell you if I did. I personally have not seen like it be a certain type who comes in. I do think that men who tend to be more what we call, quote unquote narcissists, that term gets thrown around a lot and it gets overused a lot, but like truly, narcissists, they might be more inclined to initiate, which narcissists tend to be, I think they fall into the category of a little bit more masculine, actually, if anything, not more feminine. And they want to be like, they were wronged, they're in charge here. So they might be more inclined to be the ones to file the initial filing. Women, I see women filing, women is actually more so than men, really across the board. I see very feminine women filing. I do think that women who were the stay-at-home moms they're more reluctant to file for divorce. I see them doing it more when they've really gone to their wits' end. Like, they don't know how they're going to survive. They don't know how they're going to feed their children or support themselves. They haven't worked in 15 years, 30 years, whatever it is. So they've been thinking about this for a very long time, but they haven't gotten to the point where they're just so fed up that they can't take it anymore, and everything else be damned, right? They now, I don't even know how I'm going to support myself, but I don't care anymore. I have to get out of this relationship. Other than that, I think...
what initiates that? When they are like, okay, enough is enough. Is it always different? Or obviously with domestic abuse, it might be the abuse, but with other things, like when is that?
You know, it's funny because I think the word abuse gets thrown out quite often. And I hear it a lot. I hear women calling me, he's verbally abusive, he's emotionally abusive. And I ask them always, has he ever been physical with you? Not that verbal or emotional abuse are okay, but I ask them, has there been physical abuse? Because physical abuse might warrant a restraining order potentially, or there are other implications that physical abuse might have on the case. But usually they're like, no, fortunately, no, it's just verbal. And can I get a restraining order? And I'm always like, if in every family law case where somebody comes into my office or somebody runs into court saying that there's verbal abuse or emotional abuse, they just handed out restraining orders like candy, then literally every single person going through a divorce would have a restraining order. Because obviously, when a relationship is in decline, people say nasty things. They do nasty things to each other, and it's mutual. And they do them in front of their kids, which is awful. And, and so when people say, it's not to diminish the verbal or the emotional abuse by any stretch, but it's such a common thing that I hear thrown out that it's almost like that is the thing that drives, I feel, women to the point of like, I can't take this anymore. He's calling me this. He's saying it in front of the kids. Or a lot of times women, in particular, moms, will feel like somebody does, the partner does something to the children. Not physically, not bad, but like, oh, he's, yelling at me in front of the children. He's throwing things in front of, I can't take it anymore. I can't subject my kids to this anymore. Or a lot of times there's infidelity. And that is the breaking point, right? They're like, I'm not putting up with this. I'm not putting up with someone who cheats. So they choose to end the marriage.
Is cheating a big thing?
Yes.
Yeah. And that cheated on.
Cheated on, yes. Well, both come to me, but and this is not. I can only speak to what I see in my own practice, but in my practice, it's typically women who have been cheated on, who are like, I'm not taking this anymore, and they're ready to end the marriage because of that.
Do you think for a child it's better to have parents that always fight, or parents that are divorced?
It's a great question. And, when I was in law school, the one answer that was always given was, it depends. It's like the most annoying answer.
Well, for you, what about for you personally?
But for me personally...
Because you went through a divorce.
I did. I didn't have children. So I can't really speak to what that would mean for, children. I think that for children to witness...
Oh, so you... I misunderstood. I thought your parents divorced.
No, my parents are still together.
Okay.
No.
Sorry.
No. It was one of my biggest fears growing up that my parents would get divorced.
Yeah.
But
would you have preferred your parents to stay together? Like, I personally would have rather have my parents fight every day than to meet my parents in different homes, because it's just so weird and you don't understand it. I'd rather have somebody fight every day than to lose somebody, kind of. Yeah,
I think I probably would have as well. But I think it's so much more complex than that, because, we learn as children learn how to love and how to be loved and how to be in a relationship and how to treat other people by watching their parents' relationship. And so if they learn that love looks like yelling and fighting, then they're going to grow up to not only do that and mimic that in their own relationships, but they're going to find a partner who matches that dynamic, because to them that's normal, that's love, that's a healthy relationship. So is that healthy? No. as a child, would I have much rather seen my parents fighting every day and had them be together and not go house to house? Yes, but also my parents didn't fight every day. So I can't really speak to that because some of these situations are really, truly nasty. I can say that I see a lot of, I don't directly speak to them, but I see a lot of children in divorces, and I see, how they react to it and what they're going through. And, one of the reasons I wrote my book, and because I don't want them to go through that. And they do really struggle with their parents, even in amicable situations, although children whose parents go through an amicable divorce typically tend to do really well, versus children whose parents are going through an acrimonious divorce. They typically end up having a hard time in their early teen years, like a lot of higher rates of depression. These are statistics. Like they're higher rates of depression, suicidal ideations. So yes, having your parents apart and fighting is has such a huge impact on children. They suffer tremendously. And it's really sad, really devastating. I see a lot of cases of parental alienation where one parent is trying to turn the child against the other parent. And something you hear family law judges say a lot is the child is one half mom and one half dad. So when dad, for instance, is telling the child, oh, mom is terrible, mom is horrible, or trying to turn the child against mom, the child then thinks that half of who he or she is bad, right? Because they know that I'm half mom, so that means I must be half bad also. And then there's this want to connect with mom and this desire to be close to your mother or your father, whoever, but you don't feel like you have permission to do that. And that creates a lot of, sadness. And those are the situations where we see children really, get, in bad cases, suicidal. So it's really, really devastating. And this is why we should be getting into the right relationship from the get-go and not just diving into a relationship because we're afraid to be alone or we're afraid we're never going to meet the right person, right? We need to put our fear aside and make sure that we're doing the steps to find someone who shares our fundamental values, that our relationship is built on a solid foundation, all these F words that I talk about in the book.
Is there also, what if you're really young? Maybe you can get those fundamentals, you can grow with them together?
Yeah, I think in some cases, yes. Mm-hmm. But I think fundamental values are something that are instilled in you when you're young. Yes, our beliefs change. And that's, I distinguish values like interests and things that evolve throughout our lives versus fundamental values. Like, for example, if you are, a Christian, for instance, and you were raised in a Christian household, and you personally believe in those values, and you grew up with them, and you want to continue to practice your faith, and you want your children to be raised in that faith, then marrying someone who's agnostic, or maybe of a different faith from you, who feels very strongly in a different religion or something like that, you're going to have problems once you start to have children or how you navigate life together. And those are fundamental values that you can't really change or, and even if you think you can, those are so deep down, they're who you are. They make you who you are. And, people can grow, people can evolve, people can grow together. But I think that the 3, 4, 5 things that really define who you are as a person, what you value in life. Like if you value family is super important to you. You're super close to your parents, and your partner hasn't spoken to his or her mother in years, doesn't care about family, right? You're not going to have the same values going forward. You're not going to value the same things. And then when it comes time to raising your children, it's going to really be a point of dissonance. Like you're going to argue over these things. You're going to fight over these things. You're going to want to raise your children differently. And one of the things that I see the most is, people fighting over custody in custody battles. And one parent wants to, this is just one example that I see. One parent is really wants to raise the children eating health food, right? And that health is so important. And the other parent is like, I don't care. That's, you're overbearing. Let them eat junk food. Let them enjoy their lives. Let them be kids. This is like such a basic, really superficial example. But now they're fighting over this in court. And they both love their child. They just show love differently, or they believe different things. And they want the judge to say, I'm better than you, or you're, like, oh, because I want to raise them eating health food, I should have custody, right? And the judge won't do that because the judge believes that the child should have a relationship with both parents. But the parents want the judge to decide that one's values are better than the other's values. And when it comes to the child deserves to have both parents in his or her life. And they're like, the client will say to me like, well, he lets him eat at McDonald's. I should have sole custody, right? Something like that. And I'm like, well, this is something you knew going into the relationship. This is something you knew before you had children, right? This is something that if this was that important to you, I don't tell this to my client, but this is the reason that we need to choose the right partner who shares our fundamental values. Because if that was so important to you, then you should have known by the time you have children, that's going to be a problem. You're not going to be able to reconcile those differences unless the other person is open to it and evolves and grows and change. But if it's so fundamental to you, then they're not going to grow and change. Right. And that's the difference between what's fundamentally, truly deep down inside, like who you are versus just like, oh, yeah, today I like this kind of music. Tomorrow I like this kind of music. Right. Things that change. Or, today I like yoga and traveling, but tomorrow I'm going to like, something else. Right.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Because so much responsibility and like so many, like when, let's say you do law for like a murder case and you just, it's very simple, the laws are more simple and you know who you defend or who you don't defend. Yeah. But when it comes to parents, you could see it this way, or you could, like you say, with the verbal abuse, you could be like, well, that ain't like as bad.
Right.
Because you've seen so many cases and you know how bad it can get.
Yeah.
Or you can hype somebody up and say, oh my God, this is horrible. We got to do something. Let's get a restraining order. Let's go after the husband or after the wife. So you can really, like, it's such a gray zone. No? It's like, and for you, like, what do you do with it's so up to you, kind of.
That's a great question. So again, I'm licensed to practice in California. And in California, the court is given really broad discretion to make any orders that are in the best interest of the child. So now you have a stranger in a black robe who has really wide authority to make any orders that are in the, air quotes, best interest of the child. What does that even mean? You have a stranger deciding what is best for your child, and it's so arbitrary. And so, people come to me and they want me to give them answers. And I'm like, oh, excuse me while I consult my crystal ball, because that's the only way I'm going to know what a stranger, is going to do. I can take an educated guess based on my experience and my, having seen this judge in action before, what this judge in particular may do, but I can't give you any guarantees. And so I always urge people to, take matters into their own hands and go into mediation and try to work out a deal and try to agree to something that they both can live with, that they both together think is in the best interest of their child. But the reason they're there in the first place is because they can't agree. So that's why they have to go before a judge. And if they shared fundamental values to begin with and wanted to navigate life in a similar way, they would agree and they probably would still be together and they wouldn't be fighting over the different ways they want to raise their children. So it's kind of scary that we hand over our children's lives to a complete stranger to make decisions. And one side is always unhappy. That's just the nature of the beast, right? Somebody else is making decisions and you both are asking for something, and the judge usually sides with one person. It's funny that you mentioned criminal law, because I've heard this saying many times, is that criminal attorneys see the worst people at their best, and family law attorneys see the best people at their worst. Mm-hmm. So
that's a funny saying,
yeah. which is true, right?
Man, so how does it feel for you to deal with all these people that are so low and like you said, like worst moments in their life, and they bring it to you, and then you have to go in the courtroom and you have to deal with this forever and over and over and over?
Yeah. It's draining. It is draining. And, I taught yoga for, like I mentioned, 20 years. And part of what I did as a yoga teacher was I taught people how to breathe and how to use different tools in the philosophy to work through difficult experiences, right? They're holding a very difficult pose, and how do we work through that? Or they're dealing with something emotionally in their lives, and how do we use the yoga teachings and breath work and meditation to get through that? So when I started practicing family law, when I went out onto my own, I was trying to think about how I would set myself apart from all the other family law attorneys in town, and what made me unique and different, and why somebody would want to come to me. And I realized that the way that I practiced was that I really try to look at the whole person and the whole situation. I'm not just looking at, billable hours. I'm not just looking at court. I recognize that in family law, we're dealing with a unique situation. Most people who litigate, they are corporations or businesses or things like that, where they're suing somebody, right? But family law litigants are people who never ever thought they would set foot in a courtroom a day in their lives. They don't have the money to fork over to an attorney. These are just regular people like you and I, who are they got into the wrong relationship and now they need to get out. And everyone always says, oh, it's a lot easier to get married than it is to get divorced, which is true. So, to me, I coined the term holistic divorce in family law, because that, I think, is the word that describes the way that I practice. I try to look at the whole person and the whole situation, and see my clients as real people. And, and I try to get them, I try to handhold a lot. I try to use the tools in my yoga tool bag to help them get through the process emotionally. That's obviously not within the ambit of my job as a lawyer, but I have these skills and I want to share them with my clients to try to help them make it through the process, because it is a very difficult process. I've been through it. I know how emotional it is. And now you're also dealing with pretty much all of your finances. Your financial future is in the hands of a stranger. Your children's lives are in the hand of a stranger. And you have to hand over all of your trust while you're completely vulnerable to this total stranger, and hope that they do the best job with your case. And so to me, when I approach my practice in that way, and I feel like I'm helping people and I'm helping them navigate this difficult time and I'm guiding them through it, that's how I derive fulfillment from it, as opposed to just it being something that's really emotionally draining for me. I view it as something that's fulfilling and helping others. And so that's kind of the way that I have managed these difficult situations. But when I started practicing, I remember I had a really difficult, tragic, sad case that involved abuse of a child. And I remember just like breaking down and crying in the shower at night, because it was just so devastating to me. And that was, like the first year of my practice. And, I kind of thought I need to be able to deal with this better so that it doesn't affect me on this level. So I just, try to focus on how I'm helping others navigate the process and helping them emotionally as well as, legally.
Because nobody wins, kind of.
Yeah.
Like when you get a murderer locked up, you come out of the case and you're like, okay, we got the job done.
Yeah.
But okay, let's say you give one person wins custody over the other person. But then what? You still have this broken family and everybody got to move on with their life now.
Yeah.
It's nobody really wins, kind of.
Nobody wins in family law.
Yeah.
And usually, they
Besides
say...
the lawyers, they say.
Right.
But when you have to deal with this, it's also, you get a paycheck, but you still have to look into people's sadness and worst moments.
Yeah. No, and that's true. It's really, lawyers do get paid well, but it's also a really stressful, difficult job that's incredibly draining. And so, it's a lot. It's
Does
definitely...
it humble you where you're like, my family's so awesome? Like when I worked at the Red Cross for 9 months and I walked into so many places and I saw so many people in pain, motorcycle accidents, I don't know, heart attacks, you name it, right?
Yeah.
The mental things are even way worse than the like people with schizophrenia, suicide. And I thought it would negatively affect me, but it actually makes you like very appreciative of life and like very appreciative of health.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a testament to who you are as a person, because that means that you focus on gratitude as opposed to, something else. And I certainly do. I do try to focus on my gratitude, and I think that my practice has definitely informed the way that I approach my own relationship. And I sometimes will take a step back and catch myself doing something that I think, I see as one of those slippery slope things that people just inherently do in relationships because we get frustrated. We're all human, right? We all have these moments. I'll just be like, what are you doing? Or, something like that. And then I'll take a step back and I'll be like, you know what? I'm sorry. I was really frustrated. I shouldn't have yelled at you or something like that, like where you
But
kind
you
of
feel you could give in to that.
Um,
I feel that.
I think
Like in anger, I feel.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, if I continue this, I'll end up jailed up because like I can get really angry now and really live out that anger that builds up. Or you step back, like you said, and you're like, oh, whoa, what am I? I'm not myself anymore.
Right. I think it takes a level of self-awareness that a lot of people don't have. And that's not to judge people in these situations, because realistically, I mean, you have children, I have children. When a couple doesn't have children and they're just traveling and living their lives and having a great old time, right? There are problems, and there can be problems, and people get divorced all the time who don't have children. But I see in my practice, problems really start to come up when people have children, because all of the focus goes on the children, as it should. But the relationship gets neglected, and it shouldn't. So it's kind of difficult at that point to, because you're so tired. Like you really have to have the wherewithal to say, I'm so exhausted, but my relationship is still important. And so even though I should be focusing predominantly on my children, I need to pay attention to my relationship too. It's like another thing that you need to do in addition to cooking meals and, doing naps and changing diapers and whatever else you're doing, right? You also have to consciously think about the relationship. And it's something that when you're in this kind of almost fight or flight mode where you're maybe not sleeping, or, so much energy and attention is devoted to children, especially younger children, because it needs to be, and it should be. But then you're neglecting yourself, maybe you're neglecting your relationship. And, I see a lot of relationships fall apart once people have had children for this reason. I mean, there are other reasons, like they didn't share fundamental values, or, one person has some issues that they haven't worked on, and those issues are now playing out in the relationship because, I'm not getting enough attention from my partner, and it's kind of more like selfish as opposed to recognizing all the things your partner is doing to take care of the children. It's kind of like a perspective thing. But for the most part, it's just, you have to take a step back and say, this relationship is the reason the children are here, and the children are going to suffer if the relationship is not healthy. And so I need to devote some time to keeping my relationship healthy.
But don't you think it's getting way worse because with planes and social media? Like me, as an example, back in the day, maybe my parents could have helped me with my family.
Yeah.
But now that I have the internet and I want to go to LA and I want to be famous and I make myself a name, I'm all here alone.
Yeah.
And so is my wife.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, that has never been a thing before. There's no support. There's no village around us. It takes a whole village to raise a child.
It really
does. But people don't talk. People don't even have friends anymore, right? It's like all in your phone, and you have all these social interactions, but no real interactions. Nobody really helps you with your children.
Yeah.
And you might don't even want anybody anymore. And if you get a nanny or somebody who helps you, you're even more in this cycle of, now I have to work even more, and all the free time that I get is dedicated to working even more because this system is so expensive.
Yeah.
So you find yourself, like you said, I found myself many times losing my partner because especially the mother, in most cases, is completely focused on the children, where I don't know, my wife's always going to be important to me. Nothing changed for me. I didn't give birth, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I'm the same.
Yeah.
My wife's not the same.
Yeah.
Your wife becomes a mother.
Yeah.
That's a huge change that nobody tells you about. And
yeah, I hear that a lot.
she's not the same. I am the same.
Right.
I just got a child gifted, right?
Right.
But
right.
she has all these hormonal changes. She is now a mother. She has to do so many sacrifices physically, emotionally. And the husband just gets like left on the road, kind of, you know, and you have to learn to not be like a baby yourself and that is not about you anymore. I feel like that has been the biggest change for me. Like, this is not this couple anymore. This is now, you have to sacrifice so much for the family, for the kids, where you just be last. And I had to learn that that's okay. Like, it was very hard for me to like just learn. I eat less, I sleep less, I get up earlier, and I might not get the love and affection anymore from my wife for some time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it takes, you know, a strong, confident man to accept that and acknowledge that. I see, you know, a lot of, this is a big thing when men come to my office to initiate the divorce, that is one of the biggest gripes, I think, across the board that I see, is that they're like, oh, you know, she had kids, she stopped paying attention to me, or she was less I've heard she's less attractive. I was like, oh my God, come on, guy. she made humans in her body. But, you know, things like that where, and that's not to blame men, because it must be very difficult to feel like, you know, your partner, the person who was supposed to be there, who was always sharing everything with you, is just no longer available to you. And I'm always very conscious of that in my own relationship. But at the same time, I'm tired. Like, literally 24 hours of my day, because I don't sleep at night either, are devoted to my children, right? And so, you know, one thing I've heard, and I love it, is that when your children grow up and they leave, it's just going to be you and your partner. And I think it's important to remember a few things. One, that when your children leave, it's just going to be you and your partner again, and they will leave, right? You only have relatively very few years. And when they're teenagers, even though they're still living with you, they want to go be with their friends. They want to go do their own thing, right? So you have maybe, you know, 12, 13 years, which relative to the span of your whole life, hopefully, is not a very long period of time. And really, it's those like first years that are really difficult, when they really need you. The kids are there and they need you all the time. And, you know, maybe if your wife is breastfeeding, or, you know, you're not sleeping at night, there's a lot more commitment to the children and devotion to them. That's one thing. Two, I think it's important that you continue to see it as a partnership, or people continue to see it as a partnership. Yes, your wife is devoted to the children. It doesn't mean she loves you any less. It doesn't mean that she doesn't care about you or doesn't find you desirable. And one thing I see a lot is that women actually, after they give birth, they find themselves less desirable. And when a woman feels less desirable, she's less inclined to be physical, because she doesn't feel physically attractive. And so I think, you know, that's where that teamwork and that partnership comes into play. Is it's the role of the husband to, you know, make her, like, remind her that she isn't just this vessel that has been destroyed now, that has created children, but that she's still a woman who's desirable, and she's still your wife, even though she's now also a mother. Like, these are compartmentalized roles. And then I also think, and the one thing that I see where people go wrong, is that they drift apart. They are so focused on the children that they forget completely about the relationship, and they don't set time aside for their relationship. And I think it's critical, even if it's, you know, you put the children to sleep and you devote time specifically. You're like, tonight we're going to watch this movie together. We're going to open a bottle of wine. We're going to watch this. Like, it's a set thing. Or, yes, we're going to go out on a date night. And, you know, yes, it is a lot more difficult because, as you said, we don't have that village. A lot of people aren't living with their families. You know, back in the day, in many places still they have villages, but, you know, in modern times, it is a lot more isolating to be a parent. So you don't even have that support where you can talk about these things. Like, you're internalizing all these things. And And, another thing I think is important is and it's one of the foundational principles that I talk about under foundation. It's one of the pillars is communication, right? And honesty is another one. And I think that it's really important that if you are feeling marginalized, that you have conversations, that you communicate, and you discuss ways that you can both maybe feel like maybe your wife is feeling less desirable. So she will share that with you, and you find ways that you can. She shouldn't have to tell you. You find ways to make her feel more desirable because you've now heard what she said and you want to help her. And in turn, if you say, I love that you're taking care of our children. You're doing such a great job. I respect all that you do, but I feel like I'm just invisible now. And so maybe then it's on her. Instead of getting defensive and attacking you, she has to hear you. She has to respect what you're saying, even if she's like, oh, I'm doing so much. Like, you want attention too? Like, she might. But instead of having that reaction, her reaction should be, okay, I get it. I'm really maxed. But what can I do, even if it's just a little bit, to make you feel like it could simply be like, a little like a rub on the arm or shoulder every now and then, to like a touch, to make you feel like, I'm still here, we're still together, I still desire you, like it doesn't have to be a grandiose gesture. And so, when I talk about the foundational principles, these 5 pillars that hold up a relationship, they need to be there when you get into the relationship, but they need to stay strong as the relationship progresses, because they can be destroyed and knocked over even once the relationship exists. And so we're constantly like, you need to respect what your partner is saying to you. You need to hear what they're saying to you, not get defensive about it. Like, that's part of it.
Do you hear that saying, like, weak times create like no, difficult times create strong men, and not difficult times or like weak times create weak men. Mm-hmm. Where in this society we live in, people start victimizing themselves much more. Things that might be not so bad is really bad for somebody.
Yeah.
In those 20 years, do you see like a big difference in like just where couples come to you and you just disagree with them, where you were like, you guys could have worked it out, this could have been a great family, or is it mostly like, oh my God, you guys should have come here like, I don't know, years ago? Every case is different, obviously.
Every case is different. I think that there are cases where people could have worked it out. And I get asked this question.
But that's like not your job to tell them like, yo, hold on.
Oh, no. I mean, when they get to my office, for the most part, it's too late to salvage. I think that there are relationships that could have been salvaged had they done things differently before they got to my office, because the relationship was okay. The people were okay. They just didn't communicate effectively, or they didn't respect one another, or they let other things get in the way of the relationship. Back in the day, and I'm talking about like the 50s, the 60s, right? Divorce was not an option for many people. It was taboo. And people got divorced, but it was not as prevalent as it is today. And I've been asked this question, many times of like, do you think people just enter marriage more, they're more blasé about it because they think that there's an out, or, why do you think people are more inclined to get divorced nowadays? And, there are so many reasons. It's not a black and white answer. But I think back in the day, people knew that they had to stay married, so they made it work. And
that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah, and there were horrible situations where, there's domestic violence and they had to stay in the marriage because it was taboo to get divorced. Like, that's horrible. But for the most part, like, we look at our grandparents' generation or even our parents' generation, and they stayed together because when they committed to, till death do us part, they honored that commitment. There was a respect to that commitment. And, nowadays, I think people just enter into marriage knowing there's an out, as opposed to, like, you do still say till death do us part, but, and most people don't enter into it thinking that they're going to get out of it, right? They think it's forever. And although people do get prenups, so that begs the question of, whether they truly think it's forever or not. It's a different topic. But I think that there was more of a commitment to honor that till death do us part vow than there is now. I mean, broadly speaking.
Yeah, there's something to the making it work.
Yes.
Obviously, that opens up the door for abuse and horrible, horrific things.
Yeah.
But like, for the most part, if you leave those things out, a lot of times I feel like things are, if you keep things simple, it's much easier. For like when I open up Instagram and you see all these girls and they're all young and they're all like horny, that wasn't like, it's very hard to like, and you have like this like wife that's always tired.
Yeah.
And it's not real. And it gets presented to you on a daily level.
Yeah.
Where back in the day, I don't think you're confronted with this like toxic distraction where you're like always like, oh my God, there's like same with online dating, right? With the swiping, right? You think there's like these like thousands and thousands of women available for you.
Yeah. Instead
of like the reality, which is it's not the reality.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think that there is. The culture was very different back in the day. Like there was a lot of infidelity, like back in the 50s and 60s. And it was more, I think, accepted because that was just culturally what was, it was just more accepted, right? And so I think that has something to do with it. But yeah, I mean, now you're getting all of this thrown in your face, with social media and, what is that one? OnlyFans, like things like that. There's just more access to it and it's being thrown in your face and it isn't real, right? So we have this all at our fingertips. We're constantly on our phones. We're constantly, we have this, it's just, we're being bombarded with it and it isn't real. And it's a nice fantasy. It's a nice escape, especially when the reality at home is sort of a changing climate from what you're accustomed to from, before you had children or whatnot. And so, I think, and one thing that I see a lot is that a lot of people like, okay, I think narcissists, like true narcissists, they end up having affairs because they think that they can get away with it. They're like impervious to any consequences. But I think that most people don't intend to have affairs. That's my personal belief. I think it kind of happens. Like, I think someone will feel like, let's take a case of a man whose wife just had a kid. All right. And he feels really neglected. He feels like his wife doesn't love him anymore. And instead of communicating and trying to work at it and, whatever, and it's not on purpose. He's at work one day and he's chatting with a coworker and he makes a joke and she laughs at it. And he feels that fulfillment inside from being acknowledged by another woman. The same feeling that he had when his wife used to acknowledge him, but he feels like he doesn't have that anymore. And now this woman is filling that void. And so it starts as a simple laugh at a joke. And then they start having more conversations and then romantic feelings start to evolve. But really it's this coworker is just filling that void, replacing where the wife, the needs the wife once fulfilled. And so instead of seeking it out from the coworker, that's a conversation to be had with the wife of how the needs can be fulfilled, things like that. But I think that's kind of how these affairs sort of come to fruition and this lack of communication. I think it doesn't happen intentionally, but it is a lot easier for it to happen now. And it's a lot easier to feel like, your partner is lesser than because you're being bombarded with all this imagery everywhere. It's desensitizing. And swipe culture, don't even get me started on that because I think that depersonalize, there's validity to it. Yes, how do we meet people when we're so isolated and we don't, everyone's working remotely now. There are no opportunities to meet people. But I think it takes some of the kind of learning whether you share the fundamental values and kind of the whole thing that we need to really establish when we start dating someone. It takes it out of the process a little bit, and it's just like there's so many options. It's based on appearances, and it's not deeper.
What do you think about the government getting involved in relationships?
The government's getting involved in relationships?
No, when you sign the contract of marriage.
Oh, of marriage. Well, I haven't really given it much thought, honestly. I think that's just...
Well, do you think people should stay away from getting married, or...
I don't think...
How do they solve it when they're not married, when they don't come to you?
So people still could potentially have they could have a partnership. There's case law about that, about cohabitation. We don't have common law marriage in California, but there are places that have that where you're just automatically considered married just because you've lived together for a certain amount of time, and that can be handled in a civil court still, like if there are issues that need to be resolved. So it's not like you still are shielded from litigation altogether. But I think it's certainly easier to not be married. If you end up breaking up. But if you want to commit your life to somebody, then I think that marriage is a beautiful thing. And I think that it's an important thing. And, I think, people say, oh, it's just a piece of paper. And I don't agree with that. I think it's so much more, because I think it's showing that you're committing to something for life. Like you're signing a binding contract where now you're tied together in many ways, like financially, or, depends where you live, obviously. But I don't think people should avoid marriage. I think they should avoid the wrong marriage.
And that's with looking out for those six
F words. Yeah. The dirty F words. Yeah.
And do you think, do people hop in too quick and have children too quick? Is that a pattern that you see, or is it even sometimes that people just they've been together for years and years, and then once the children came, that really made everything come out?
Yeah, they're both valid points. I think people do jump in too quickly, but that speaks to fear usually, or lack thereof. They're not afraid enough because they don't think the consequences through. But usually it's fear, and then having children come into the picture and mess the relationship up. It's not the children that mess the relationship up. It's the two people who don't have similar values or share similar values that mess the relationship up, because, and a bevy of other issues. But I think if people really, truly are fundamentally aligned in what they believe and how they want to live their lives and the goals that they have in life, then they're going to navigate life in very similar ways together as partners, as opposed to drifting apart. And I think children don't destroy relationships. They destroy bad relationships. Like they're a spotlight that you cannot escape. They shine a spotlight on all the flaws in the relationship, and you cannot escape that spotlight. So you have to make sure that you're getting into a strong, solid relationship built on these foundational principles and shared fundamental values and, all the other things, so that when that spotlight is shown on the relationship, that the relationship can withstand the challenges that the children place on it.
And then would you say divorces with no children, is this much easier?
Sometimes. There are other issues.
Are there many cases even?
There are. I would say the majority contain children or involve children. The relationships that end up in divorce where there are no children, I find, are typically quicker marriages. A year and a half, 2 years, 3 years. They figure it out pretty quickly that they shouldn't have been together. It's not a longer term. I think, with the children, people try to work it out, and they really try to stay together for the children for the most part, because nobody wants to get divorced and shuffle their children back and forth and all that. So I find that those relationships with children, it's usually the 10 to 13 year mark, because they've been married for 2-3 years before they have kids. They have a first kid, then they have a second kid, and then 5 years after they have their second kid, 4 years, whatever it is, by now it's 10 to 13 years into the relationship, and they can't make it work. They've tried, they just can't. And so, and some people have children to try to save the relationship. They think it's going to save the relationship. Like, do not do that. That is never going to happen. Children are not going to save your relationship. They're going to make it worse because it's not the children, it's you. And they're not going to, and what a tremendously horrible responsibility, a burden to place on your children's shoulders, that they're responsible for your relationship. Like, that's a terrible message to send to your children. And then when the relationship fails, they feel like they are the reason for the divorce. Like, do not have children to save the relationship.
Do you think you can really tell beforehand, or it's a little bit how it plays out? Like, I don't know, when your wife becomes a mother, do you think the red flags were there beforehand?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, I can look at a relationship. I can look at two people, and it's not because I'm psychic. It's just because I've been doing this for so long. I have a really good sense of this. And I can tell you for the most part whether a relationship will survive or fail. And I'm usually right.
Whoa.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Pretty cool superpower, huh? But yeah, it's because I can just see whether people are aligned or not, and how they're going to, how they deal with one another, how they deal with challenges. And I some people it's just so obvious. Others it's a little more nuanced, but I can still tell just by talking to someone for a few minutes.
And then would you say, if somebody like educates themselves, they listen to you, they read your book, that it just can be avoided?
So that's a two-part answer.
The divorce.
The divorce, not necessarily, because I wrote my book not for people who are already in a relationship, although it is a great tool for self-reflecting, and if you are in a relationship and if things are going in the wrong direction, maybe you can pull back and kind of apply some of these principles. But really, the book is more for people who are looking to find a relationship, like a lifelong, meaningful, lasting relationship. So I think that if they apply the principles and really do the work and really like read what I'm saying and be honest with themselves and be objective, I think that they can find a meaningful relationship. I do. And I think that they can find that relationship and not get divorced. That's the hope. I get asked the question a lot when I do podcast interviews, things like that, can a marriage be saved once it's on the brinks, and how? And that's a different book. That's my next book. But because I get asked it so often.
Like how to make it work?
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, like I think, yes, there are the relationships that should not have existed in the first place. Right. 50% of marriages end in divorce, but I think that most of those marriages should not have existed in the first place. But there's a small percentage.
Like how many?
I think about like 85 to 90% should have never of the 50% that end in divorce. I think about 85 to 90% shouldn't have existed. This is my own opinion. This is my own arbitrary number that I've come up with based on what I see.
And would you also say they're self-inflicted?
I don't know if self-inflicted is the right word, but like avoidable.
You knew.
Oh, yeah. Like you did not think about this relationship going into it. Like you were attracted to each other, or you thought that you had so much in common, but it was sort of like superficial interest. Like the example I like to use a lot is when you're dating or you're just newly married or whatever, but you're dating and you both love to travel, right? And you go on really great adventures together and you have the best time and you have a blast. That's not indicative of how good the relationship's going to be. Like when the times are good, that's not an indication of a good relationship. An indication of good relationship is how you work through problems together, how you problem solve together. And so to me, I'm always more interested in, when something goes wrong, do you work together to solve the problem, or do you belittle each other and yell at each other? Do you work together to try to solve the problem, or do you blame each other? Right? Those are kind of more. I always recommend if it's financially feasible and you're dating, take a trip to Europe, to a country where you don't speak the language. Try renting a car and driving. One of you has to navigate, one of you has to drive, and figure it out and see how well you work together. That's like a really good indication, because that's like a really almost like a survivor situation, right? Are you compatible ultimately? And so, I do think that relationships, when we're talking about that other small percentage of the relationships that should have been but kind of fizzle, when children are introduced or for one reason or another. And I think that those relationships can be saved. I do. But I think you need to get to them before it's too late, before the mutual respect is gone, before before it's too far gone, before one person has a foot out the door. And I think both people really need to be committed to saving it, because if one person's committed and the other isn't, then it's not going to work, right? Both people really need to be committed. And that's one of those scenarios where I feel couples counseling is effective. I don't think it's effective where people already are on the outs and they just want to go to counseling so that the therapist can tell the other person that they're wrong and point the finger, right? I think both people need to be wholly committed to salvaging the relationship, and it has to be at a point where they haven't lost respect for each other yet.
Do you think it's hard to break the cycle where your parents went through divorce and you grew up with that, and now you have to have a functioning family? Is that a pattern?
Yes, it is definitely something that happens because, again, we learn how to love, how to be in a relationship, how to be loved by watching our parents, first and foremost. Actually, is one of my F words, is fixing. Okay. And when I talk about fixing, I talk about, you don't want to try to fix your partner. You're not looking for someone who's broken. You're not looking for a project. You want to find somebody who's, if they had issues, we all have issues going through life, but we want to make sure that that person has worked through those issues and they're able to be in the relationship in a healthy way so you can have a healthy relationship. But fixing also refers to yourself. So if it's the sort of thing where your parents were divorced and this has heavily impacted how you view relationships, either you're afraid of relationships, you're afraid of commitment, or you look for relationships that mirror the pattern of your parents' relationship, or whatever the issue may be, it behooves you to work on that before and unpack it. Like, go to therapy, unpack why you feel that way, what you want to do differently. Like, identify these things, be really critical about it, and be honest with yourself, and really analyze what went wrong in your parents' relationship and what was wrong about that and what you want to do differently. I think it's possible. I see people who, whose parents were divorced and they're in really healthy relationships, but they did the work, versus a lot of people whose parents were divorced, they end up just looking for a similar dynamic in their relationship, and that then leads to divorce, and it becomes a revolving door in this, self-perpetuating cycle.
And then it's crazy because if so many children go through that, there's a lot of fixing to do.
So many, and this is what worries me, is that if 50% of marriages end in divorce, and this number is skyrocketing, and it's higher than it used to be, like in our generation. Yes, there's something to be said about, watching your parents fight because they had to stay together, or watching domestic violence because your parents had to stay together because divorce wasn't an option. But putting that aside, the higher the rate of divorce, I think then going forward, the higher the rate of divorce, and the more confusion in relationships, and the more, mental health issues and things like that, because it's self-perpetuating, right? It's like we're getting into these relationships that we should not be in the first place. Then we're subjecting our children to the divorce because we made the wrong decisions out of fear or whatever the reasons, because we didn't approach it critically, because we were just chose our partner because we were attracted to them, or we thought we had so many things in common, or whatever these superficial things are. Now we're putting our children through it, and then our children in turn are going to go through not only seeking out, a similar dynamic in their relationship, but now they're going to go through a litany of other mental health issues because of it. And so when they get to the point of looking for love or, trying to be in a relationship, they're now also, some of them, dealing with mental health issues on top of it, which is not a healthy place or a healthy way to get into a relationship in the first place. So we're just in a downward spiral with this. I think this is, again, when we started out today, I said, one of the main reasons I wrote this book was because of the children. I want to prevent children from going through this and dealing with the just slew of implications that come along with an acrimonious divorce. And this is part of it. It's really far-reaching, the impact that a really vitriolic divorce can have on children.
When they're really, really young, do they show less effect because they just think that's the normal? Like, I know a family and the kids don't question it because they're not like 14 or 9. They're like 3. Right?
I think it depends. I think if things are amicable and the parents get along, then that's all they know. That's all the children know. So as long as the parents can co-parent and, try to make decisions together and keep it neutral, I think that is certainly better than a child who, even in an amicable situation, a child who's now 8 or 9 or 10 and used to his or her parents being together, and now the family's ripped apart and they have to live half time at mom's, half time at dad's, or whatever. So yes, I think younger is better. But if when they're younger, they split apart and, they're fighting for the next 20 years, 18 years, but whatever it might be, that's not necessarily good either, because the child just watches this growing up. So that's not healthy either.
Do you get any young parents?
Oh yeah. I would say mostly. Do you mean like they had children young, or they had children older?
Young.
Or that they're going through the divorce younger?
Well, yeah, like in their 20s.
Yes, but mostly they've had children either in their early 30s or they're now in their late 30s and, early 40s when they're going through the divorce. I think that's just
do you have people like in their 20s coming to you?
Not terribly often, because I think the nature of where we live in Los Angeles, and I think people have children typically later, whereas like, a place like, maybe I'm just throwing something out, but like Ohio, right? Like in the middle of nowhere, and I don't know if this is true or not, I'm just making it up. Like it might be more common for people to have children younger, but here in Los Angeles, typically more commonly people have children later. So I'm seeing older people typically.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Having children later?
Yeah.
I think there are pros and cons to it. I think...
Like, do you think you can easily make it work when you're younger or when you're older?
A relationship?
Yeah.
I think that you can... Listen, I think you can make a relationship work if you're younger or older. I think, obviously, as you get older, you have more life experience. You're more confident in who you are. You are calmer in many ways. You're more mature. Those are just natural things that come with age. And so the more maturity, hopefully, that you have as you get older, hopefully the more maturity you can have in the relationship. But that's not to say that somebody who's younger can't be mature in a relationship. I think that's absolutely possible. I just think it's more prevalent, more like, I think that's more the anomaly, right? But back in the day, people had children when they were, my mom was 19 when she met my dad. I think my dad was 20. They had me when my mom was 26, and they're still together, 40 plus years later. So, but there was, they made it work. It's not that their relationship was without its problems. They were just both committed to making it work. Sometimes I'm confused as to how that happened, because they're very different people in so many ways. But it's because they share, I think, ultimately fundamental values, and that they really are committed to the relationship and to the institution of marriage. And, and I think that my mom was very immature in many ways. And my dad is very patient. So I think that dynamic in their relationship is what helped it survive. But, at the same time, my mom is like a force of nature, and she's a go-getter, and so for her, yes, she matured with time, but I think her commitment to the relationship was there, whether she was 26 or 46. It didn't matter. So I think that's, there are exceptions, but I think, obviously with time we get more mature, we learn more, right? That's just how it goes.
But also with children,
right?
Sometimes I don't know if I've ever matured. Because it's always about me, and then once it's not about me anymore, I can mature because now I'm like, okay, I have a different. It's not what I do. It's how do I affect my family, my children? How am I with my wife? Before it's more like me.
But that in and of itself is mature thinking, because many people don't think that way, and I think that's a more mature perspective, is to have the self, self-awareness.
I got forced into that through my children, I feel like.
Yes, but everyone gets forced into it through their children. But some people don't handle it in a mature way.
Yeah, they run.
They say, "Oh, my wife's not paying attention to me," and then they go and have an affair. It's so having that self-awareness to take a step back and to say, my children are forcing me to be more mature here and to think bigger than just myself, is something that, yes, you say, and it's a testament to your maturity, but many people, even when they're older, it's not a matter of age, just many people don't, and it happens to be men because women have the children, right? And many men don't have that self-awareness, and they don't ever come to that realization.
And is it because, like, when I grew up, I was the outlaw with parents at home. Everybody was divorced in my class, and I was like the only one. And I watched that too.
Yeah.
My friends going from one home to the other, and this whole discussion. And then I always was so proud that I had parents that are together.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't see an option with my family.
Yeah.
Like, I'm in it for good.
Yeah.
And I think that really helps if you don't see that open door and you don't see that way out. For me, it's unacceptable. Even if my relationship is non-working and we're just friends.
Yeah.
I do it for the love of my children, kind of. Like, you gotta sacrifice it for them.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself in actually, we do love each other, and then this time passes where the baby is super small, and you suddenly do have they go to school, and then you have time again.
Yeah. Oh no, it's so temporary. I think it's so hard when you're going through it.
Yeah, it's never ending.
And and you're in it, and you're like, there's that saying where what is it? The days are long, but the years are short, about children.
Yeah.
And it's true, like when you're in it and you're the thick of it, it's hard, and it's hard to really focus on much else, but it does go by quickly. And even if it doesn't seem like it when you're in it, going through it, and it's temporary. And the thing that I always, to me, your children are a product of your love for each other, right? They're like, literally, there's nothing more representative of that than two people coming together to create another person that is a product of both of them and their love for each other. And, if it is that, some people just are like, oh, I just want to have a baby, so you'll do. That's problematic, right? So when we think about it that way, and we look at our children and you see yourself in them and you see your partner in them, like, there's such a blend of both of you and their personalities and their looks, like in every way. And it's humbling to take a step back and see that and be reminded of the reason those children exist in the first place. I don't think many people, when they're going through it and they're, it's hard because it's like you're in fight or flight mode. You're like in survival mode. And it's hard when you're in that mode and you've got all this adrenaline and cortisol and hormones and all this stuff to really, truly just, take a step outside of yourself and see it for what it is.
Do you think you can have a fulfilling life with no children?
Absolutely.
How?
Well, I think if you've never had them, then you don't really know, right, what it's like to have them. I think
You don't think biologically you just know you missed out on something? You think you could have been old and just...
I can't answer that question because...
What about for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, listen, my life was great before I had children. It was amazing, and I wanted to wait as long as possible to have them, not because I didn't want them, but because I wanted to just, I knew once I had them, they were there with me forever, right? That was it. And that I knew that I was going to give them my everything and more, and I was devoted to them, and they were my biggest responsibility. And so I wanted to live as much life and have as much experience as possible until, before they were, like, even when they're, 40 years old, right? Like, they're still, you're worried about them, you're still thinking about them, you're still their parent no matter what. So, for me, that was really important to just have as much time for me to do what I wanted before I had them. And, I was having a great life. Like, I don't feel like I needed children to complete my life or to make my life more fulfilling. And so if I never had them, I wouldn't know, but I think I would have always wondered. And I think that at a certain point, I would have maybe regretted not having them. I think it's hard to say in the hypothetical, right? But obviously they're incredibly fulfilling and they're exhausting and they're trying, but they're also just, little amazing people who are so cool to be around. And it's just such a different chapter of my life now. And it's such a different, chapter in anyone's life, right? It's like that was my life before children, and now I have this new adventure, and it's cool, even though it's exhausting.
Yeah, I don't know if you can. I don't know if I look at it. Sounds fun in theory,
right?
You and your partner, la la la, always on a yacht.
Yeah.
But in reality,
yeah,
you'll be alone when you're older.
And that's what it's funny because my husband and I, before we made the decision to have children, we talked about it a lot. We went back and forth because we loved our lives. We were having, great lives, and we were, climbing the ladder and trying to work on our careers and traveling and, and we talked about it. And ultimately he came to the conclusion, he said, but that's our purpose. Like, that's like, why are we working for all of this? Why are we working so hard if we have nobody to leave it to, right? Like, it's almost like that is our reason for being here. And I didn't look at it that way, but I thought that was a really beautiful and correct way of putting it for us, not for everybody, right? And there are some people who should not have children, but for us, that was kind of the reason.
And I like also what you said. In a relationship, everybody can have a good time, right?
Yeah.
But everybody can go out into a restaurant and drive a fancy car.
Yeah.
But how do you go through like war?
Right.
How do you go through diversity? And that really gets tested through children.
Yeah.
I've learned much more than I've ever learned through children. And I've also it's just different to love to your partner. I never understood what that means if your wife gives you children than just your partner. Like, now she's the mother of my children.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
No,
it'll never be the same.
It's never the same. And it's funny,
That's different than marriage. That's like...
It is different.
It will never change. That's a to the death. She'll always be the mother of my children. You cannot change that.
Yeah.
That makes the whole person different. That is not a dating kind of thing. Like, this is like a real commitment where I will never, that will never change. And the children will always need their mom.
Yes. And I guess this is the reason people get divorced, because a lot of people don't see it that way. And a lot of people, to give to their credit, a lot of people going through divorce, they do say, she's the mother of my children. I want to make sure she's supported. And, they do say that, and they do acknowledge that. And that's great. I love to hear that. But a lot of people are like, how do I not pay any money? How do I, and I think that maybe that lack of respect for that role as the mother of the children or whatever is kind of the reason that they can just turn their back on the marriage in many ways.
Is that a new thing that dads want the full custody? Was that a thing 20 years ago?
I think it's always been a thing. I think it's definitely getting more prevalent, but I think it's misused a lot. I think a lot of people use it to hurt the mother. They want to, like, they know that it's going to hurt her and they're angry and they're trying to weaponize the process to hurt their partner or ex-partner. I also think that a lot of it is financially motivated. Like in California, child support is based on not only people's incomes, like their respective incomes, but it's based on how much time you have with your children. This is only in California. So if you have more time with your children as a dad, you have to pay less child support to the mom if you earn more than the mom. That's assuming you earn more than the mom. So a lot of men who earn more than their ex-wives, they want to get more time with their children, so they have to pay less child support. So there's a financial incentive there, certainly.
How do you feel when you walk into the courtroom?
It depends on my case. If I feel like I have a strong case, obviously very confidently. I mean, I'm always confident.
Those rooms were like weird because we changed the name for one of my childs because he had like 4 last names, so we wanted just one. So we had to go in front of court.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I guess I'm used to it. I've been doing it for a long time. I've always.
It's an interesting environment, no?
It is an interesting environment, for sure. I guess it's just I'm accustomed to it because I've been doing it for so long. But it is, for somebody who's not used to it and who doesn't do it, it's definitely a strange place, and it's very sterile in many ways and
intimidating.
Definitely intimidating, yeah. And I remind my clients of that when I urge them to try to strike a deal and try to settle cases. I'm like, if you don't settle, you're going to court, and that courtroom is a very intimidating place. And if you have to get up on the stand to boot and testify and stare your soon-to-be ex-husband or ex-wife in the eye as you're recounting the details of your relationship in front of a judge who's a total stranger and a courtroom full of other strangers, because, anyone from the public is allowed to be in the courtroom. So, do you really want to do that? Is that something that you are ready for? It's hard to comprehend until you're actually there.
It's a weird obsession to also sit in those rooms.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think many people do it for fun, but recreational courtroom hopping. But you are invited as a member of the public to view court proceedings, unless they're, confidential.
And then do you urge them to deal with it without the court?
Yes, always, 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 always. There's a process called mediation where you and your partner, there are many ways of doing it, but you can ultimately, with the help of a neutral third party, try to reach an agreement outside of court. And I always encourage people and urge them to try to do that if they can, because it's more cost effective. You don't have a stranger deciding the fate of your finances and your children and whatever other issues there are. So yeah, definitely.
And why does it take so long?
It doesn't always take so long.
But if both parties agree, it can't be done instantly, no?
Oh, it can be done really quickly. Yeah, absolutely. I just had a case, probably the quickest case I've ever had in my life, where they agreed and we were, I think, done in 3 or 4 weeks with the whole case. So it's possible. In California, there's actually a statutory period where you cannot be divorced. So in California, from the time that somebody is served with divorce papers, they cannot be divorced for 6 months from the date that they are served with divorce papers. So you can have your whole case settled. You can both sign off on an agreement within a matter of 3 weeks. But when you get your judgment back, which is the document that you get, where all your agreements are and the judge signs off on it and says you're divorced, it'll give you a divorce date of 6 months from the date of service, because there's a statute. Some states have statutory periods, some don't, but California does.
All right. I think that's it.
That's it. No more. You're like, this is heavy stuff, man.
Yeah, that's some crazy shit. That's crazy. Yeah. It's a crazy topic.
It is. And, ultimately, I just want people to find the right relationship so that they don't have to deal with any of these other topics, or have to go to court or deal with any of that.
Maybe last question.
Yeah.
do you believe it's still, maybe without the children and without the marriage, it's still important to maybe date the wrong people, just to go in relationships and go out there? Because I think like maybe this is all so intimidating that people just, there's so many red flags and everybody has their baggage. And I don't, sometimes I feel like I can only speak out of my perspective. It's so hard to put yourself in a different perspective, but out of my perspective, there's been a lot of times where I could have like been like, oh, I don't want to deal with my wife's postpartum depression. I'll just find somebody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or I could be like, yes, this is very challenging, but I am strong enough to deal with that. I'll help her.
Right.
I'll get her healthy, or I'll work with her to achieve together this goal. Right?
Yeah. But I think that means, like, if you think the relationship is worth that, like, commitment, and ultimately doing anything to make it work, and supporting your partner, and being a team, and being a partnership, but you have to think the person is worth it, which is why you marry them in the first place. If you're not willing, I said this earlier, is like, a good relationship isn't how things are when you're partying or you're traveling or whatever. It's a good relationship is how you work through problems together, or challenges or obstacles, like a postpartum depression. That's not a it's a challenge. It's an obstacle, and you need to work through it together. If you have a solid foundation, you can work through it together. If you don't, because all you cared about was that your wife was attractive and that's why you married her, then when she's going through that, you're not going to want to work through it with her, because ultimately your priority was that she was attractive. That was your goal in finding a relationship. So, that's part of it. But to your point about dating, the wrong people, yes, of course, when you're dating, date everyone, figure out what your fundamental values are. You have to identify them first. But I also think that you really shouldn't linger. If you identify that a relationship is wrong, instead of staying in it because you're afraid you won't find someone else, or you're having such a good time with this person, don't linger, because you're going to get more attached. And as you get more attached, you're less likely to leave the relationship, even though you knew it was wrong to begin with. So if you identify that it's wrong off the bat, your intuition is telling you, or you really have identified this is wrong for XYZ reasons, don't stay in it. You're doing that other person a disservice, because they're getting more emotionally invested. You're getting more emotionally invested, and it's going to be harder to leave, right? So we have to, I think, we have to approach dating very critically. We have to treat it like a job interview. We have to make sure this is the right candidate for the most important job in our lives, which is our life partner. And we need to make sure from the get-go that person is that. And if we identify that they're not that, which I think there's a moment where we know, right? And if we make the decision to then still stay, we're setting ourselves up for a lifetime of failure. Even though in the moment, it's going to be difficult to go through a breakup, it might be painful, it's going to be a lot more painful and a lot more costly to go through a divorce. And it's going to be a lot worse if you drag your children through that divorce, because you were too weak in that moment to say, this is not right for me and I need to end it now.
In your new book, are you gonna have something like where you identify that you're victimizing yourself?
The new book is just a concept at this moment. At this point. This was the big reveal on your show that there's another book in the pipeline, but I haven't started working on it yet. I just kind of have some notes jotted down and some concepts generally of where I'm going with it. But I'm open to any topics that anybody wants me to address. Obviously, I'm addressing them from the perspective of a divorce attorney and the things that I see, and where I see things kind of at the crossroads, and where they go wrong, and then where they could have gone right potentially if people had done something differently. So that's kind of the general concept. But yeah, I mean, victimhood is a big part of the problem, obviously, because it's not putting people on equal footing. Versus it's not ownership, right? It's instead of victimhood is I think it's a flaw in communication, right? If you're saying I'm the victim, obviously not in domestic violence, but like, oh, I'm the victim of you not finding me attractive, or, oh, it's you. And it's just finger pointing. It's not solution focused. So we're not focused on how do we fix the problem. We're focused on blaming and then wallowing in our own victimhood. And so I think that it's a valid topic to address in the broader sense of, we need to take responsibility and we need to communicate effectively and respectfully instead of just feeling like, we're the victim and you're at fault. Because I think relationships are a dance, and I think that both people are to blame for them failing, even where one person is clearly in the wrong, the other person still does things that contribute to the demise of the relationship. It's never one-sided.
Yeah, I mean, even in the domestic violence, that might be the end of it, but that must have started along the road, right?
Yeah, I mean...
It comes not out of nowhere that somebody just hit somebody.
Right, and that's not to say that anyone deserves to get hit, obviously, but there's something...
But it's more complex than that.
It's everything. Listen, everything is more complex than just black and white. I really think that everything is so nuanced and there's so many shades of gray. And yes, it's black and white. You should never hit anybody. That is patently wrong. You should not do that. You should not hit your wife or your husband. That's just wrong. We can all agree on that. But, there are things that are going on in that relationship that are deeper issues. They didn't just get to that point. It's not the victim's fault, but there are things that led to the downfall of that relationship, and both parties may have contributed to that. The way one partner then reacts to that downfall is wrong, but the downfall itself, and it may have been something as simple as the victim should have never chose this partner because the victim should have identified the red flags and never entered into that relationship. But that person might have entered into the relationship for the wrong reasons, and now they're trapped in a really horrible relationship.
And there's also a difference between a wife hitting the husband and the husband hitting the wife, no?
There is.
It's a very different thing.
It's very different, but I have seen some crazy stuff with women, but not a lot of it, but throwing things, breaking things over a husband's head. There was, I don't remember who it was. There was an actress a while ago who threw a stiletto shoe at her husband and hit him in the forehead with a stiletto, and it was bleeding. But I mean, I don't see it often, but it does happen, and and it's usually a lot of breaking stuff, and but it does happen.
No, of course.
Yeah,
but it's
mostly it isn't. It isn't. It isn't. But I think that it comes from a different place. I think that's the difference, where the reason that it's happening is different. And I think that whether or not it's true, women will always play the self-defense card. I don't want to say always, but I see women who are violent to their husbands play the self-defense card. Oh, he was beating me and I just hit him in response. That's usually because they want to be perceived as the victim. That's their defense. But men don't typically. Men will say, oh yeah, she was trying to hit me and I grabbed her arm so she couldn't keep hitting me and I kind of pushed her back. That's what men will say at best, typically. But then there are the guys, I had one guy one time, it's not funny, but he actually, I had him on the stand and I said, "Did you slap her?" I was representing the wife. And he said, "No, her face hit my hand." I was and I just closed my eyes for a second because I didn't want to laugh, because I knew at that moment that I won the case. I mean, her face hit my hand. Oh my God. So there's some crazy stuff that I've seen.
Well, I'm really excited for your new book. I think it's really, I mean, I see it so much, non-functioning marriages, sexless marriages.
Yeah.
Affairs.
Yeah.
I mean, you name it.
Oh, yeah.
finding the true love is like one thing, but
Yeah.
like also like making it work is another thing. And
Yeah. And I think a good relationship should be easy. Like people say relationships are hard, but I think if you find the right person and the right partner and the right teammate, it's easy. Like there are moments that are challenging, but I think overall it's pretty easy. And if you're in a relationship that's hard, or you're the person who says relationships are hard, I don't necessarily think you're in the right relationship, because it shouldn't be that hard.
But is it not because our life is so comfortable? Like imagine you've never gone to war, you've never not had to eat, you always have a roof over your head. Your parents are kind of rich. Not really, but it's not like hard for you to go to school and
Yeah.
get a job.
Yeah.
Our life is so soft.
So soft.
That a fight with my partner is the worst thing on a daily level.
Yeah.
Because nobody's harming me, or I have to like fight for anything, or I have to show how big of a man I am under all these other men.
Yeah.
No, like literally the conflict with my wife is the lowest point on a daily level. So that makes it like, have you heard of this saying, like the worst thing that has ever happened to you is the worst thing that has ever happened to you?
Yes. Oh, no, that's true. I mean, like the other day, my 5-year-old, our TV stopped working and he was watching cartoons and he literally started crying. And I'm thinking to myself, there are wars going on. There are children being bombed. Their parents are dying in front of them. They don't have food. And you're crying over the TV going off. And then I took a step back and I'm like, but that's the worst thing that's happened to him. So he doesn't know about all this stuff. So yeah, it's true, right? We only view things through the prism of our own lens and our own experiences. And, the most stressful day for somebody else might, for me, be like a walk in the park. But my most stressful day might be like, I don't know, somebody else's nightmare. I don't know. It's like it's hard to step outside of ourselves, because even though we can conceptualize things, we don't really truly understand anything outside of ourselves unless we experience it. So yeah, I think that's true, of course. And I think that like what we were talking about earlier is that back in the day, divorce was more taboo. People, were not allowed to get divorced, but also during the Great Depression, people were trying to feed themselves and feed their families, and they had to band together to do it. They weren't thinking about like, oh, my spouse is looking at other women on Instagram. Like that wasn't, they were just trying to get food on the table. So there were bigger things at play. And that's not to say there aren't bigger issues in people's lives, right? Everyone has their own stresses and their own problems. But yeah, I think that's true.
All right. Let everybody know again your book.
Yes.
That's out.
Yes, my book is called Live, Laugh, Find True Love. You can find it on, Amazon or wherever you buy books.
Awesome.
And yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.